Welcome to the Ministry Solvers podcast, where we help find ministry solutions to your problems. I'm Erinn Watkins, and I'm excited about part 2 of our interview with Drew Anderson as he dives deeper into a budget and also how to continue to build a ministry that thrives. Let's talk budget. You mentioned it a little bit. And so sometimes when starting a ministry, it can be hard to get the funding you need from the church. So do you have any tips or strategies on how to get more of the financial backing you need? And with you talking about GAP, did you present a financial proposal to the church beforehand, or did you present the vision and then the financial proposal came later? How did that work?
So the way our church budget cycle works is that any ministry that's launched has to present within. So so the church runs on a fiscal year. So starting in January, all the way through December, we run on an academic year. So we start in September and we run through August. It's really May, but I mean, that's our academic years through August. And so that presented instant challenge. And so the way that I mitigated that challenge is I had them split tuition. So the students don't pay all up front. They pay half here and then half in the next semester. So our fall is being funded by the previous gap year's spring payment. And, gotcha. And that's how, so you got to be able to think through how are you going to how are you going to make it. So from a budget standpoint, when we launched charging $3,500 per student. Wow. Okay. And so that, if you look at any gap year, is a third to a quarter of what gap years are out there. Now, all the students aren't being housed and fed like some of those gap years are, so you got to compare apples to apples. But the first year we had 6 students and they were housed and fed for free and only paid $3,500. You're going to see gap years in the range of $15,000 to $25,000 roughly for a gap year, Christian gap year. And so right off the bat, most ministries are subsidized by the church. What I mean by that is their general fund or their tithes and offerings offset 90 to 100% of all the expenses that ministry incurs. GAP in particular, from the beginning, was hardly subsidized by the general fund, by the tithes and offering. It was paid for operationally, so not my salary, but the operating costs were paid by the students' tuition. Okay. So we started with the ability and with the argument, we're almost self-funded. And so now I'm talking operating cost. Now that since has grown. And so GAP is now about 50% funded or subsidized by the general fund. And that had to go through iterations of meetings with the finance board. And so that obviously implies that you have to have a very detailed budget and budget estimates. So my point is that as you look at that scenario and you look at self-funded year one, small, our primary focus for me was really understanding what are we actually going to spend our money on. Year two, I could offer a better budget to the finance committee. They understood it. They saw that it was mainly self-supporting, so they got behind it. Year three, I asked for more money to be subsidized by the general fund, the tithes. And then year four, I asked for even more money. And so I incrementally asked for money as I had justification to do it.
So as you talk about that, what are some just outside of the GAP program, but just starting any ministry, some things that a church leader like yourself, if someone's presenting a ministry proposal to you and saying, hey, I need this amount of budgeting as well to support this ministry proposal, what are some key things that you're looking for in that proposal?
Man, I'm looking for a very clear understanding of what they're trying to do. Okay. Like, what is your vision that's biblically informed? That's number one. I am looking very clearly as much as I can, trying to understand, and I'm focusing on how are you within the things, the activities, accomplishing that vision? How do these things that you're asking money for contribute to the accomplishment of that vision? And they better have answers for that. And so what that is doing is that's sharpening the pencil such that you're not asking for things that are just frivolous. That every activity I do has a purpose, it's intentional. And so, like, I can talk you through my budget. The thing that I'm working on, and about to submit the budget again this year, is that we, from the curriculum that we buy, the curriculum that we print, that we've written here in house, from the materials that we buy, has a direct correlation to achieving that biblical success. So you have to have basic financial understanding of how to put together revenues and expenses, line items and things like that. You gotta have a basic understanding. And then every activity you have has to contribute to that vision. So they would need to have a compelling biblical vision and then tie those activities to it. So a budget really begins with a ministry plan. And then a ministry plan helps you see, like, and I would put it like in my case, like, okay, so how long is your ministry? I would ask that question. Well, it's 9 months or it's 12 months. Okay, well, what are you doing month 1, month 2, month 3, month 4, month 5? And how does that activity contribute to accomplishing the vision that you've set out to accomplish? And then, well, how much does that activity cost to actually accomplish it? Well, I need to print some things. I need to buy this book. I need to buy this, these supplies or this equipment. Okay, well, when are you going to buy that? So you put it there in that month. You see what I'm saying? And then you work your way down. And then what you've done by laying out a ministry plan chronologically is that you've developed your learning or your discipleship activities or endeavors and your supplies to accomplish it. And then you take that information, all those 12 months, and you bring it into a revenues and expenses. Are you going to charge for it? Or is it going to be free and the church is going to subsidize it? Well, how much do each of those expenses cost? Do you need all those year 1? Can you grow and do it, more in year 2? That'd be my thoughts.
That's good. So you talked about volunteers and how you've grown that with the GAP program. But when we talk about volunteers in general and starting a new ministry, how do you get the right volunteers in place to partner and launch and build your ministry?
So, okay, big principle is I look for the right spirit. He that is spiritual, 1 Corinthians 2. You look for the right spirit. Acts 6, deacons, they had the right spirit. Men of good repute. You've got Titus 1. You've got 1 Timothy 3, qualifications of an elder. And that is not only applicable to those who are elders. That ought to be what every Christian aspires to express. Galatians 5, fruit of the Spirit. So you want to have someone that has the right spirit, okay? And there are 5 things I look for in volunteers. Number 1 is, do they have an opportunity? So do I have a position to offer to them? Number 2 would be, are they the right fit? Do they fit the culture?
Now, talk about that. How do you determine if they're like the right fit? What does that mean?
You just know. You can't measure that.
Okay.
Like, when you get a guy that walks in to a room of young adults and he showed up in a clown suit, no, man, that's not gonna work. You got a guy that just, the way that he talks to people, he just wants to sit down and just pour out his heart to everybody, and nothing wrong with that. You ought to go into counseling. You see what I'm saying? I mean, there are things that you look at someone, you just go, man, he fits. Like, it's not a square peg in a round hole. Like, this guy just fits, or this girl just fits. And you know it because you see how people respond to them whenever they come around. Yeah. And so if you watch, we had a guy, and I will tell you this, we had a guy that did not fit year 1, and he was a volunteer. And I had to confront him. And I didn't want to, because that's never easy, and I don't like confrontation. But I'm a pastor and I'm a shepherd of a ministry, and I got to shepherd these students. And so I sat down with this individual and I said, brother, listen, I think you are a godly man. I think you have desires to do ministry. I think how you're expressing that desire in this particular ministry either is being misunderstood or is being inappropriate. And And we got to think through, and it wasn't just one time, it was multiple times. We got to think through, how do we shepherd you through this and help you accomplish your desire to do ministry? Because I don't want to get in the way, but I also want to be a shepherd enough to say this is not fitting. And he came and apologized to the students because he had done some things that are a little bit just different, just weird, kind of, and it was okay. We worked through it, but ultimately, he had a place if he wanted to stay, and he knew that. And so, fit is critical. Spiritual gifting has to be there as well. So, am I going to try to put a guy in a teaching role that all he wants to do is serve chairs, move chairs? I mean, I may need to stretch him from time to time, but I need to be thinking about his spiritual gifting. And that, again, is through observation. I don't think an assessment is going to give me that. I think it might give some indication, but ultimately it's going to be through observation and response of the people. And if he has an effectiveness in teaching, then I'm going to think about that. When I saw Calvin teach those students, I knew, I couldn't explain it to you. I went, he needs more time. There's no question about it. And then I approached Calvin. So you've got fit, opportunity, spiritual gifting, passion. Do they want to do it? So don't do me a favor by showing up. Don't do the students a favor by showing up, because I don't want to have to remind you that you need to be here at 8 a.m. or at 10 a.m. You need to be here ready to go. And then the last one is, do you have the time? So you may have all four of those, but you're in a season that you need to back out. And I've had that happen. So I've had people that have come into the ministry and are no longer in the ministry just because they don't have the time. So those are the 5 things.
Got it. Now, is there a time commitment in terms of how you structure your volunteers? Do they serve on a semester basis? If they sign up to serve, they have to serve for a year. How does that work?
I don't think that there's a one way to do it personally. I think you need to have it clear to them, hey, you're gonna commit to serve the rest of this year. If it's a volunteer that I'm not sure of, I may say, hey, why don't you do a few times? And then we'll see. So I would say take it case by case. There's no, I don't have a particular. Now, there are certain volunteer roles that require them to be committed for the entire year. Continuity is key. So if we have a guy that comes in, he's only there for 6 months and then he's out the last 3 months, that's going to be tough.
Mm-hmm. Got it. So do you have any advice when it comes to knowing when a ministry is complete? In terms of when I say complete, I mean it has served its purpose and now it's time to retire that ministry. We know that churches can oftentimes have too many ministries and they don't want to step on anybody's toes on ending a ministry, but sometimes ministries really do need to end. So any advice on that?
Man, that's an ecclesiological question, and I love it, by the way. But I think the shepherds of the church ought to be able to recognize that. Mm-hmm. And what I mean by shepherds is the elders of the church ought to be able to recognize the time has come for this particular ministry to be transitioned either into a new one or to be removed completely. I can tell you that in Bible Church has done it. Essentially is that back in the day, years ago, one of the pastors launched a campaign essentially called Unleashing the Church. And it created a frenzy of what I would consider ministry, new ministries. And while that's good, and it had tremendous benefit, it also created a situation where a ministry is going to begin and end with one individual or two, which means it's personality driven. So you've got the hunting ministry that starts, you've got the motorcycle ministry that starts, you've got the knitting ministry that starts, you've got the fill in the blank ministry, right? And that layperson had the idea, they had the vision, and they brought it to be. But then maybe they're not leaders in the sense of shaping the culture, putting together organizational structures that has continuity and stability, and it's able to be replicated. And so it just fizzles out whenever they leave. And let's just say the ministry was successful in the sense it was reaching and changing lives. But because that individual started it and didn't have a vision for transition, it fizzles out. That's why I say that's an ecclesiological decision, because when Unleash the Church was launched at our church, that was a decision made from, I would call it a pastoral decision that led to what became the many ministries that didn't Bible church. Whereas if you have a different ecclesiology, then it's going to be the shepherds that would do that. It wouldn't be the lay people.
So how have you worked through failure in a ministry that didn't thrive like you imagined?
So I'll talk about it theoretically, and I'll talk about it particularly. Theoretically, you're going to have two different positions: avoid failure, fail as soon as you can. Now, the fail as soon as you can posture or theory is very hard to embrace because nobody likes failure. We hate it. However, I do think if you can moderate that to some degree and say, embrace failure as an opportunity to learn, then I think you're going to be what I would consider flexible. So what I say a lot in ministry, and I say this to all the volunteers and staff that I work with, is that we want to be malleable, not brittle. We want to be malleable in the sense that we're going to have a firmness, we're going to have a strength, but we need to be able to be shaped. And so one of the primary failures I've had in ministry, I would say in particular, is with people. Like I said, it's just people. And it's not a failure of like a moral failure. It's more of a strategic failure that I had on communication. And a lot of my challenges have been with communication. And I think anytime you get in ministry, and I heard it said even at Dallas Seminary, that 80% of conflict is through miscommunication and misunderstanding. Now, that number I don't think is empirical, but I think it's, we would say in large part, conflict happens, and you would say even failure in your mind, if you perceive it to be that way, is that way. And so what I would say is that learning to have the ability to see any challenge that you're facing as a means to change as a leader that could be perceived as a failure. Like, hey, you didn't do well in communicating X. I need you to do a better job. Somebody could say, well, that's a failure. I need to do better. No, I say that's an opportunity for me to learn, and I can now adapt and make the adjustments. Any ministry that I've been a part of that has tried something and it didn't work, and so we adapted it, could be perceived as a failure. I'd never perceived it as a failure. Even the ones like you and I have done marriage retreats, and those have been varied in how they have from start to finish been accomplished. And I think we've changed and adapted them. Like I can tell you, year five of GAP is different than year one. And so the areas that have been changed haven't been failures as much as they've been opportunities to learn.
That's a good way of looking at it.
Yeah.
Yes, because in anything you do, you're going to have some mistakes, right? Especially 100%. When you're starting out. And the key is to evaluate those things and keep track and learn from them, keep moving on throughout that. And I think that's something that I admire you about, because that's something you always do. You always take the time to reflect, look at different parts of your ministry, see how you can do it better, what you can improve. And I think doing that definitely is what takes a ministry from starting at year one and looking a certain way to year 5 to where it's humming, it's thriving.
Yeah, you know what? I'll give you a ministry failure here that could be perceived as that, but that was turned into it. So there's a book that I think Jim Collins wrote called Good to Great. I think I'm saying this right. And in it, his premise is you have to have humble determination. So you have to be humble enough to be teachable, and then you have to have determination enough to stay at it, whatever it is that you're doing. And that doesn't mean the task. That means the vision. So the biblical vision is what we're aiming for. The task, as I mentioned earlier, that you budget around, the learning activities, the discipleship activities, they adapt to the accomplishment of the vision. And so I'll give you one example. We had a handbook that we gave to the students last year that was not received well by the students and a couple parents. Not all the students, but some of them. And what I learned in that was how I communicated in that handbook was perceived to be harsh, cold, And it wasn't just me, obviously, but it was others, that because we were viewed as a team, but it came across as not indicative of our hearts. And I said, total miss. I'm going to rewrite the handbook. And I rewrote the handbook over the summer, and I submitted it to our team. They reviewed it, and the handbook has been a blessing this year.
Wow, that's good. I want to ask you, what do you want Christian leaders to take away most from this conversation on starting a new ministry from scratch?
You have to have a theology. Psalm 1 says, how blessed is the man. You know it. Stand, walk, sit, or walk, stand, sit. Sinners, ungodly, scoffers. But his delight is in the law of the Lord, and on his law he meditates day and night. He shall be like a tree planted by streams of water that bears fruit in season, and his leaf does not wither. But the wicked are not so. They're like chaff in the wind, and they are not known in the judgment. And so, if you want to have any eternal significance in any ministry, you have to be a man or a woman committed to a Psalm 27 verse 8 mentality. David said in Psalm 27:8, he says, when you said, Lord, seek my face, David said, my heart says to you, your face, O Lord, I will seek. Coram Deo, that your heart is ever before the face of the Father. So every morning I'm awake, tired as all get out, like every other human being that wakes up in the morning, but I get my coffee, I drink my water, and I come out and I spend time with God. And God, by his Spirit, is shaping me, and he's molding me, and he's allowing me to have insight into my life, insight into others, insight into the ministry. And so that has to be, you have to have a theology that is rooted in a personal devotion to knowing God. Secondly, you have to be willing to do the legwork of developing a ministry plan all the way down to the budget, and the competency to articulate that biblical vision clearly so that other people can sense it. 5 senses. And then I would say, thirdly, you just got to pray. You have to trust God that if he is bringing this about, Philippians 2, he will and work according to his good pleasure. There is nothing the enemy can do to thwart it. He will distract you. He will tempt you. He will try to make you deviate. He will try to bring pride. He'll try to bring in opposition. He'll try to bring in so many elements into your life that you thought, this should have never been here. And then you go to the morning, you go in your morning to the word, and you're reminded, no, God is shaping me. His goal is my looking like Christ, period. And if that's his goal, then he's going to use, according to James 1, every trial to bring me to maturation. So I got to be a man of prayer.
Amen. I love that. So I know you've given us some resources that we can share with our audience, but I wanted to know what resources have helped you most with creating a successful ministry launch strategy. Is there any ones that you would say influence you the most?
So much of what I would say is like, there's not a playbook that I've used. As I mentioned, it's so much based on a theology.
Got it.
What do I believe about God's word? And how is that going to influence the vision that I write by God's grace, the mission that I'm centered around, the scripture that's going to be the guiding passage, and then the core values that are established as part of the ministry? I mean, that's as simple as I would get with that. And then from there, I mean, I think there's books out there, but you know, I've just, so much of what I read isn't formulaic. And I know you're not asking for that, but you're asking in general, is there a ministry related book that provides it? And I think I gave some of the books. You know, I'm reading Dracula right now. Okay. Bram Stoker's Dracula. All right. And that's above and beyond all my other reading. Okay. And I'm also reading Silmarillion right now by Tolkien. Okay. So I've got, that's my nighttime read, and my Dracula is like my, when I can fit it in read. And I can tell you what I'm learning from Dracula that Bram Stoker had no intention of teaching me is how evil really is, and how it is a work of God to thwart the evil in the world. And it is inexorable in its pursuit of all that is right and beautiful and good.
Wow.
And so I think about that and I apply it to ministry. And so what that's doing for me is it's shaping me as I come into the day at the office and I go, the evil one doesn't relent. And then I read Silmarillion, and I see this Melkor figure who's one of the head um, Valar that Iluvatar created, the head guy, and he was created with the ability to sing, and they all were, and they all began to sing, but Melkor put discordant notes in his song, and it began to distract all these other Valar. They called them holy ones, and it began to distract them, and he began to sow seeds of discord and despondency. And I went, isn't that just like the evil one? And so what I'm thinking about is that, I read books to ascertain principles that would apply to the ministries that I'm doing. And that's what I would encourage. Be my big principle takeaway would be, and I think I gave you a list of books, I can give you more, but be a reader of varied resources and genres. And as you do that, read literature, read biographies, read fantasy, read sci-fi, and look for the ability to critically reflect on the author's intent and to find the spiritual application. You know who was really good at this was Galen Richter, and he didn't do it with books as much as he did movies. He could take a movie and find the spiritual application, and so you want to be able to do that with books, but you need to write that ministry launch book, Watkins.
I mean, if you want to co-author it together, we can definitely do that.
Let's do it.
Yes, sir. Yes, and I like that you mentioned that, because one of the things that in our relationship that I've just noticed about you is that discipline, that commitment to reading. I mean, we were talking before we started doing the podcast, and you were like, yeah, just 15 minutes ago, I was out on a run, just that discipline of getting that run in, that workout in. And so can you talk to me about the healthy rhythms of a leader? What should every Christian leader be doing to fulfill their calling successfully? Well, that concludes part 2 of our interview with Drew, and I hope you guys were able to take some good notes and just glean from that so much rich information. And I'm just so thankful to be able to have him as a friend, as a leader, just in ministry. And next, he's going to talk about the healthy rhythms of a leader. The healthy rhythms of a leader. And trust me, you do not want to miss it. So we look forward to you tuning in next time. And as always, feel free to share this video. If there's someone that you know that can benefit from this, we would love for you to share it, and also get them signed up as well so they can be a part of the subscription list. And you can do that by going to msolvers.org. Again, that's msolvers.org. Well, may God bless you and keep you until we meet again.